Okay, guys, factoring by grouping. So in this case, we can't do big star or little star because there are four terms. So big star and little star work for trinomials, so three-term polynomials. We're down to four. Even though we still have four, as we spoke of yesterday, GCF is something you should always check first. So do 12, 21, 8, and 14 have a numerical GCF. And then you also want to check and make sure there's not a letter that runs through all four terms as well, because that could be pulled out as a GCF to simplify your work. In this case, there are no GCFs for the four terms. So we are going to take those four terms and we are going to group them, first two terms and last two terms. So that 12AC plus 21AD is going to go on our first, what I'm going to call factor or binomial, plus 8BC plus 14BD binomial as well. Now we can look at these as two separate polynomials. So the one in the front, you're going to look for a GCF. So numerically, 12 and 21. What's the greatest common factor between 12 and 21? They both are divisible by 3, and they both have an A. So 12AC and 12AD both have an A. So we could pull a 3 and an A out there. If you're looking at the second one, so 8 and 14, they both are going to have a 2 GCF because 14 divided by 2 is 7, and 7 is prime. Letters, they both have a B, so we could pull out a B. So if we pull out the 3A from the first set and 2B from the second set, we should have matching parentheses. If you don't have matching parentheses, and I'm talking about this 4C, 7D, and 4C plus 7D, they match. If they don't match, that means you pulled out the wrong GCF. So your goal is to make sure those match. Then we're going to pull our first two terms for our first parentheses, and our parentheses set is our second parentheses. So now we have two factors. And if you box or FOIL this back together, you should come out with the given problem at the top. So again, you're going to take your leftovers, so your GCF here and your GCF here, and that's what makes this first set of parentheses. And then the matching parentheses is your second factor. So this is factor 1, and this is factor 2. So you just factored by grouping. All right, so here's another one. So we're going to factor Rx plus 2Ry plus Kx plus 2Ky. So first thing first, do you have a GCF? There is not one because there's a 1, a 2, a 1, and a 2. There's Rx, K, and Y, and none of those letters go through all four terms. So we're going to factor by grouping. So we're going to group the first set and we're going to group the back set. So two terms and two terms. So we're going to have two binomials at that point. We're going to look at our first binomial, and we're looking for numerical GCF first. So 1 and 2 do not have a numerical GCF. Next, you're looking at your R's and your X and your Y. Well, R does happen in both terms. So we know that R is a GCF. If you look at your second binomial, again, you have a 1 and a 2. So there's not a numerical GCF. So you're going to look at your letters at that point, and they both have a K in common. So we can pull the K out as a GCF here. So K, K, and then R and R. So we pull out our R and our K, we are left with X plus 2Y for both of those binomials as leftovers. So as we did last time, our parentheses match. That's great. So we're going to take our first two terms, and we're going to bring those down, and that's going to be our first set of parentheses. And then the parentheses itself, X plus 2Y, is going to be your last parentheses. And again, if you box or FOIL this guy back together, then it is going to give you where you started. So R times X is Rx. R times 2Y is 2YR. K times X is KX. And then K times 2Y is going to be 2KY, which should be what we started with, and it is. So that's how you can always check and make sure that you're grouping correctly as well. So number 1, your first step would be make sure your parentheses match when you pull out your GCF. And then 2, you can actually go back and multiply them together. All right, so this is going to be a you do. Pause it. There's something different about this one, but I want to see if you can do it. So pause it and see if you can work it. All right, so first you're going to check for GCF. I have 2's and 3's and X's and Z's and Y's. I don't have an X all the way through. I don't have a Z all the way through, and I don't have a Y all the way through. 2 and 3 do not have a common factor other than 1, so it's not an option at this point. So we are going to factor by grouping after we check for that GCF. We're going to keep a plus in the middle. So we're going to group the first two terms plus group the last two terms. And that's where we're going to take that negative and attach it, or the minus, and attach it with that 2. So looking at our first term, we're going to look for our GCF, and then our second term, our second binomial. So each factor, we're looking for a GCF again. So 2x squared, negative 3xz. 2 and 3, still no numerical factor that's the same. So we can pull out an x. We can take out 1x here and 1x here. And just like yesterday in the hockey stick method, where it's the lowest exponent, so that x to the 1 power, that imaginary one, the negative 3x. So x is the most we can take out. Then looking at your second one, again, still a 2 and a 3, but they do have the y's in common. Sorry for that jump across, guys. So the y's are in common. So if we pull out those GCFs, x from the first one, x times 2x gives me 2x squared. X times a negative 3z gives me that negative 3xz. And then the bottom, the second one, y, when we pull it out, y times a negative 2x gives me a negative 2xy. And y times 3z does give me that 3yz. So we did that right. And our parentheses match almost, except that's a plus and that's a minus. But they're completely opposite. There's a negative 2 instead of a positive 2, a positive 3 instead of a negative 3. So to fix that, we can pull out a negative. So basically factor out a GCF of a negative 1, like we discussed when we wanted our 8x squared, we wanted the a to be positive. We can also pull out a negative 1. So we'll make that y in the front. We'll add a negative 1 right here. And then that'll switch all the symbols on the inside. So then we pull out our negative y, negative imaginary 1, and then these guys switch. And now those parentheses do match. So you're looking good. So you're going to take your front two guys. That's your first factor. And then your parentheses match, and that's your second factor.